The weight of the silver tray was a familiar ache in Ilara's wrist, a grounding reality far from the silk cushions and gilded cages she had once known. Here, at Ethelgard's, London's temple of gastronomic excess, she was not Princess Amira of Al-Zahra. She was Lena, a waitress with a quiet smile and an efficiency that made her almost invisible, which was precisely the point. For 6 months, this anonymity had been her shield, her sanctuary. The clatter of Michelin-starred plates and the murmur of discreet wealth were the sounds of her freedom. Tonight, however, a discordant note had entered the symphony. He sat at table 7, the prime alcove overlooking the Thames. Marcus Thorne. His name was a headline, a brand, a synonym for brutal corporate takeovers, and a fortune so vast it resembled a national GDP. His face, a mask of bored entitlement, was plastered across business magazines she sometimes straightened in the lobby. He treated the staff not as people, but as inconveniently autonomous pieces of furniture. He didn't speak to them, he issued decrees. More water, no ice this time. Are you incapable of remembering a simple instruction? He'd snapped at a junior waiter earlier, his voice a low whip crack that made the young man flinch. Ilara had watched from a distance, her hand tightening on a polishing cloth. She had seen men like Thorne her entire life, men who believed their wealth elevated them above the courtesies of human decency. They were loud, predictable, and ultimately fragile. Their power was a shell, easily cracked. Her father, the king, had taught her that. True strength, Amira, he would say, his voice gentle but firm as desert rock, is the mountain that stands silent, not the sandstorm that shrieks. Now it was her turn to serve his table. Thorne was entertaining 2 men in immaculate thobes, their quiet dignity a stark contrast to his loud American brashness. He was trying to impress them, attempting to pepper his speech with clumsy, mispronounced Arabic phrases he'd likely learned from an app. Ilara could hear the grammatical errors, the butchered vowels. It was like listening to a child trying to recite poetry. The 2 guests, Sheikh Al-Fahim and his advisor, offered tight, polite smiles that did not reach their eyes. Ilara knew that look. It was the smile of courtiers enduring a fool. She approached the table, her steps silent on the plush carpet. "Your wine, Mr. Thorne," she murmured, her voice soft and neutral. She held the bottle of Chateau Petrus, a vintage that cost more than her entire 6-month salary. Thorne didn't look at her. He was in the middle of a boastful monologue about a new skyscraper he was funding in Dubai. Complete dominance of the skyline. "Nothing will touch it," he was saying, gesturing expansively with his arm. It happened in a blink. His flailing hand, heavy with a gold watch that could have funded a village, collided with her wrist. The bottle, slick with condensation, slipped from her grasp. For a horrifying, slow-motion second, it hung in the air before crashing onto the table. Deep crimson liquid, the price of a small car, exploded across the pristine white linen, splashing onto the front of Thorne's custom-tailored suit. Silence descended upon the alcove. The murmur of the restaurant seemed to fade into a distant hum. Every eye was on them. Thorne looked down at the spreading stain on his chest. His face, already flushed with wine and ego, contorted into a mask of pure fury. He slowly lifted his gaze from the ruined suit to the spilled wine and finally to Ilara. His eyes were small, cold chips of ice. "You clumsy bitch," he hissed, the words low and venomous. Ilara stood frozen, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "I am so sorry, sir. It was an accident. Please allow me to—" "Shut up," he snarled. He was trying to maintain a veneer of control for his guests. But the rage was boiling over. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, but it was a whisper that carried the sharp edge of a razor. He switched to the broken Arabic he had been brandishing all evening. "Ya kalba, ya bint al-haram," he spat, the insults crude, common. "You dog, you daughter of sin." He likely thought it made him sound worldly, powerful, using a language he assumed a simple waitress wouldn't understand. Ilara's blood ran cold. The words themselves were ugly, but common enough. It was the sheer contempt behind them, the assumption of her ignorance, that stoked a fire deep within her. She kept her eyes downcast, her training, her very survival, screaming at her to remain Lena, the invisible waitress. Apologize, cower, disappear. But then he went further. He must have saved this one, a phrase he'd been taught by someone who either hated him or was as ignorant as he was. A phrase so vile, so specific in its cultural and historical context, that it was almost never spoken. "Anti min nasl al-Khadimin," he whispered, his breath hot and foul. "You are from the bloodline of servants." In the grand tapestry of Arabic insults, this was not a simple curse. It was a denial of history, of lineage, of honor. It was a phrase used by ancient conquerors to demean the vanquished noble houses. To a person of the Arabian Peninsula, it was a deeper wound than any physical blow. And for Princess Amira of the House of Al-Zahra, direct descendant of the Lion of the Desert, a bloodline that had ruled for 1,000 years, it was an unforgivable sacrilege. The mountain could no longer stand silent. The storm had arrived. He saw the shift in her eyes before he felt the sting. He saw the demure waitress vanish, replaced by something ancient and unbreakable. Her spine, which had been slightly bowed in a posture of servitude, straightened into a rod of regal steel. She looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time, Marcus Thorne felt a tremor of uncertainty. Then he made his final fatal mistake. Fueled by her sudden defiance, his rage erupted. He drew back his hand and slapped her, hard across the face. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent restaurant. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The two sheikhs at his table stared, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. To strike a woman, a guest worker, in such a public and dishonorable way, it was an act of profound barbarism. Ilara's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A crimson mark began to bloom on her cheek. For a moment, she didn't move, the ringing in her ear drowning out the frantic whispers of the patrons. She could feel a single, hot tear trace a path down her other cheek. A tear not of pain, but of pure incandescent rage. The shield of Lena was not just cracked. It had been vaporized. She turned her head back slowly, her eyes locking onto Marcus Thorne's. The fear he had seen flickering in them moments ago was gone. In its place was an abyss, cold and deep, and utterly devoid of mercy. She took a single deliberate breath, and then she spoke. Her voice was no longer the soft, deferential murmur of a waitress. It was a voice of command, of absolute authority, resonating with a power that seemed to come from the very earth beneath them. And the language she used was not the common street Arabic Thorne had mangled. It was classical, royal Arabic, the language of poets, scholars, and kings. A language so pure and complex that even the sheikhs at the table leaned forward, their eyes wide with astonishment. "Anta, ya sagir al-nafs, alladi tatakalam bilisan al-jahala," she began, her elocution flawless, each syllable a perfectly cut diamond. "You, O small-souled one, who speaks with the tongue of ignorance." Thorne stared, his mouth slightly agape. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. This was not a plea, it was a judgment. She took a step closer, her presence suddenly filling the entire room. "You dare to speak of bloodlines in my presence? You, whose lineage is written in spreadsheets and hostile takeovers, a history as shallow as the puddle of wine you weep over." Sheikh Al-Fahim's jaw dropped. He recognized the dialect now. It was the formal court accent of the Al-Zahran royal family, an accent few outside the palace walls had ever heard. Ilara's voice dropped, becoming even more intense, a silken threat that wrapped around Thorne's throat. "You speak of servants. Let me teach you a lesson about the bloodline you have insulted." Her eyes flickered to the two sheikhs. "A bloodline that tamed the desert, that penned laws while your ancestors were still painting their faces with mud. The bloodline of the House of Al-Zahra." At the mention of the royal house, Sheikh Al-Fahim's advisor choked on his water. He looked from the waitress's blazing eyes to his host's stunned face, a dawning, terrifying realization spreading across his features. Thorne, utterly bewildered, could only stammer. What is this? Who the hell are you?" "You invoked my lineage," Ilara continued, her voice rising again, a clarion call of command that echoed through the stunned restaurant. "So you shall be judged by it. You have laid a hand upon the daughter of King Khalid bin Abdulaziz al-Zahra. You have committed an act of aggression not against a waitress, but against a sovereign nation." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The entire restaurant was a tableau of frozen shock. Waiters stood with trays in hand, patrons with forks halfway to their mouths. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the Thames outside the window. Then she delivered the final devastating blow. She looked past Thorne, her gaze sweeping across the restaurant, past the terrified faces of the diners, and into the dark corners of the room. In the same perfect royal Arabic, she issued a single terrifying command: "Imsika." Seize him. For a half-second, nothing happened. Thorne let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Seize me? Are you insane? Security! Get this crazy woman out of here!" But the restaurant's security guards were frozen, their eyes wide, staring not at Elara but at the windows. Then it began. A single, tiny, impossibly bright red dot appeared on Marcus Thorne's forehead. Another appeared on his chest, directly over his heart, then another on his left temple, and another on his right. Within seconds, his body was a constellation of crimson stars. They danced across his expensive, wine-stained suit, painting him as a target. The red dots bloomed on his hands, his throat, his eyes. Panicked, Thorne looked around the room. On the forehead of his own bodyguard, who was reaching for his weapon, a dozen red dots appeared simultaneously, freezing him in place. The diners began to scream. They saw them now, on the rooftops of the buildings across the river, in the darkened windows of the office block opposite, silhouetted figures, barely visible, holding long, dark rifles. The restaurant's own security team, seeing the sheer number of professional laser sights painting the room, dropped their radios and raised their hands in surrender. From the shadows near the kitchen entrance, a man emerged. He was not a waiter or a chef. He was dressed in a simple, dark, tactical suit, but he moved with the lethal grace of a panther. He was followed by 4 others, all moving in silent, perfect coordination. They did not carry rifles, those were for the men outside. They carried compact sidearms, held low and ready. The lead man stopped beside Elara's table. He ignored Thorne completely. He bowed his head to Elara, a gesture of profound respect and loyalty. "Your Highness," he said, his English crisp and accented, "Captain Kalen, at your command. Forgive our delay. The order was not to intervene unless your life or honor were directly threatened." He glanced at the red mark on her cheek, and his eyes, for a fleeting moment, became chips of obsidian. That line has been crossed. Marcus Thorne stared at the man, then at the waitress, the princess, and back at the dozens of red dots that covered his body. The billionaire, the titan of industry, the master of the universe, began to tremble. His empire of wealth and power was utterly meaningless in the face of this. This was a different kind of power. An older, more absolute kind. Your Highness?" Thorne stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. The insults, the slap, the arrogance, it all evaporated, replaced by a primal, gut-wrenching terror. He was looking at a woman he had just assaulted, a woman who could apparently summon an army of assassins with a single word. Elara looked down at him, her face a mask of cold, regal authority. The hurt was still there, deep behind her eyes, but it was shielded by 1,000 years of royal duty. "You wish to know my name, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice now calm and chillingly quiet. "I am Princess Amira Elara bint Khalid al-Zahra, and you are now a guest of the Al-Zahran Royal Guard. I suggest you do not resist." Captain Kalen and his men moved in. They didn't touch Thorne yet. They simply surrounded him, their presence an invisible cage of deadly intent. The 50-plus snipers outside were the bars of that cage. The entire opulent restaurant had become a royal prison, and Marcus Thorne was its sole terrified inmate. The world outside Ethelgard's continued on, oblivious. Taxis sped by, couples strolled along the embankment, the lights of London glittered on the dark water of the Thames. But inside, time had stopped. A global incident had just been ignited by a glass of spilled wine and a single arrogant slap. The waitress named Lena was gone forever, and in her place stood a princess who had just reminded a very powerful man that some bloodlines were not to be trifled with. The immediate aftermath was a study in controlled chaos. Captain Kalen spoke quietly into a small device in his wrist, and the restaurant was sealed with terrifying efficiency. The heavy oak doors were closed and locked from the inside by his men. The terrified patrons were instructed, in calm but non-negotiable tones, to remain in their seats and silence their phones. This was no longer a police matter. It was an issue of international sovereignty being exercised on foreign soil. The restaurant manager, a portly man named Julian, who usually commanded his domain with the authority of a Roman emperor, was now a trembling, sweating mess. He approached Kalen, wringing his hands. "Sir, I must call the police. The Metropolitan Police have jurisdiction here." Kalen didn't even turn to look at him. One of his men stepped forward, holding up a small, leather-bound portfolio. He opened it to reveal a document bearing the seal of the British Foreign Office and the royal crest of Al-Zahra. "Diplomatic immunity and sovereign security protocol," the guard stated flatly. "All personnel attached to Her Highness are operating under treaty provisions. The local authorities have already been notified. They will be securing the perimeter, nothing more." Julian stared at the document, the official seals and signatures swimming before his eyes. Notified, not asked. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. This was so far above his pay grade, it was in a different stratosphere. He simply nodded and backed away, retreating to the safety of his office. Meanwhile, Ilara's attention was on the two sheikhs. They had risen to their feet, their faces a mixture of awe and profound embarrassment. Sheikh Al-Fahim, an elder statesman from a neighboring emirate, bowed deeply. "Your Highness," he began, his voice thick with shame, "Princess Amira, had we known to be a guest at the table of this Jahil, and for him to treat you so, it is an insult to us all. We are shamed." Ilara's expression softened slightly. These men were not her enemies. "You have no reason for shame, Sheikh Al-Fahim. You did not know. I chose this life of anonymity for a time, for my own reasons." She glanced at Thorn, who was now sitting rigidly in his chair, pale and sweating, his eyes darting between the guards and the unwavering red dots. This man's ignorance has simply brought that time to an end. Her gaze lingered on the sheikh's advisor, a younger, sharper-looking man who had remained silent. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of calculation, of fear that went beyond the immediate situation. She filed it away. In her world, every detail mattered. Kalen approached her. "Your Highness, your instructions? Take him to the private dining room upstairs. I will speak with him alone," she commanded. "Alone, Your Highness?" Kalen's voice was laced with concern. "That is unwise." "I will not be alone, Captain," she replied, her voice firm. "You and your men will be right outside the door. He is a broken man, not a physical threat. His power was in his money, and that is a currency that holds no value here." She looked at Thorn, whose billion-dollar suit was now just a stained shroud. "He needs to understand the full scope of his mistake." Kalen nodded, conceding the point. "As you wish." He gestured to his men. "Escort Mr. Thorn." Two guards moved towards Thorn. They didn't grab him, they simply flanked him, their presence more menacing than any handcuffs. Thorn, looking like a man being led to the gallows, stood up on shaky legs and allowed himself to be guided away. As he passed the other tables, the hushed whispers of the patrons followed him like a funeral dirge. They were witnessing the spectacular, terrifying collapse of a titan. Upstairs, the private dining room was a world of quiet luxury. A long mahogany table dominated the space, overlooking the glittering river. The guards brought Thorn in and placed him in a chair at one end of the table. Ilara entered and took the seat at the opposite end, the entire length of polished wood separating them. Kalen and his men exited, closing the heavy doors with a soft, final click. For a long moment, there was only silence. Thorn stared at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. The red dot from a sniper across the river remained fixed on his chest, a constant ruby-red reminder of his predicament. Finally, Ilara spoke, her voice calm and measured. She had switched back to English. 6 months ago, I left my home, my family, my title. I came to this city to live a life that was my own. Even for a short while, I wanted to understand the world beyond the palace walls. I wanted to earn my own bread, to feel the exhaustion of a day's honest work, to be seen as a person, not a symbol. She leaned forward, her eyes pinning him in place. In all that time, I have been treated with rudeness, with impatience, with indifference. But I was always treated as a human being. Until tonight. Until you. Thorn finally looked up, his face a pathetic mask of desperation. Princess. Your Highness, I had no idea. It was a mistake. I was angry. The wine. I can pay for it. I can pay for everything. I can make a donation to your favorite charity. A hospital, an orphanage. Name your price. Ilara let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. My price? Mr. Thorn, you still think this is about money? You think you can write a check and make this go away? You slapped a waitress, but you insulted a princess, and you have no idea what that insult truly meant. She paused, letting the silence stretch again. That phrase you used, anti min nasl al-khadimin. Where did you learn it? Thorn hesitated. An associate, a consultant for my deal in the Gulf. He said it was a way to put someone in their place, a strong insult. A strong insult, she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. He didn't tell you that it is the chosen curse of the Al-Haddad faction. The very words they used in their last attempted coup, when they tried to brand my family as illegitimate rulers, as descendants of servants to a greater tribe, a lie they have peddled for generations to justify their treason. Thorn's blood ran cold. This was no longer just a personal insult. He had stumbled into a hornet's nest of royal politics, of blood feuds and succession battles. Your consultant, Ilara continued, her eyes narrowing. Would his name happen to be Tariq al-Jamil? Thorn's face went white. He nodded mutely. Ilara sat back, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. It was all clicking into place. The sheikh's advisor, his nervous glance, the specific insult, the business deal. Tariq al-Jamil is my uncle's chief strategist. My uncle, General Saif, who believes the throne of Al-Zahra belongs to him. The man who arranged the marriage, I fled my country to escape. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. You see, Mr. Thorn, you were not just having dinner tonight. You were being tested. You were auditioning to be the financial weapon my uncle needs to fund his next attempt to seize power. Tariq taught you that phrase to see if you had the stomach for their brand of politics, to see if you were ruthless enough to align with them. She turned back to face him, her silhouette framed against the London skyline. And by insulting me, his runaway niece, with his chosen poison, you have shown them your loyalty. You have picked your side in a civil war that has not yet begun. You didn't just spill a glass of wine, Mr. Thorn. You have just poured gasoline on a fire that could burn my entire country to the ground. The single red dot on Thorn's chest seemed to burn brighter. He finally understood. He was not just a man who had insulted a princess. He was a pawn, an accomplice, a co-conspirator in a plot of high treason against a sovereign kingdom. And the punishment for that was not a fine or a lawsuit. It was something far, far worse. Marcus Thorn's world had been built on the unshakable belief that he was the most important person in any room. Now, in this silent, opulent room high above the Thames, he realized a terrifying truth. He was the most expendable. His mind, usually a sharp instrument of calculation and strategy, was now a frantic mess of pure survival instinct. He looked at the woman before him, no, the princess, and saw not an adversary to be beaten, but a force of nature to be weathered. I didn't know, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I swear on my life I had no idea about any of this. It was a business deal, a real estate venture. They called it the Oasis Project. Towers, hotels, a new financial hub. There was no mention of politics, of a coup. Ilara walked slowly back towards the table, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Of course there wasn't. Men like my uncle are not so foolish. They disguise their daggers in blueprints and contracts. The Oasis Project is real, I'm sure, but the profits would not be used to build a city, Mr. Thorn. They would be used to buy weapons, to bribe generals, to hire mercenaries. You were not just an investor, you were to be their treasury. She sat down again, her gaze intense. Tell me everything, every meeting, every name, every promise that was made. Who is their contact in Europe? Where does the money flow? Who signs the documents? Thorne hesitated for a split second, the old instincts of a ruthless businessman, never give away leverage, never show your hand, flickering to life. Ilara saw it in his eyes. "Do not mistake my questioning for a negotiation," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You are not in a position to bargain. You are in a position to beg. Captain Kalen has a list of your assets. Your bank accounts, your shell corporations, your private jet. By now, my father's finance minister is on the phone with every major banking institution from London to Zurich to Hong Kong. He is explaining to them that a prominent American businessman has been formally linked to a terrorist plot against the Kingdom of Al-Zahra. Your assets are not just being frozen, Mr. Thorne. They are being seized as instruments of treason." The blood drained from Thorne's face, his life's work, his empire. Gone with a few phone calls. The sheer, terrifying speed and reach of their power was beyond anything he could comprehend. He had built his world with money, and they were unbuilding it with a word. "My government, the US Embassy," he stammered, clutching at straws. "Will do what?" Ilara countered. "They will issue a statement expressing deep concern. They will ask for a formal explanation, and my father will provide one, complete with evidence of your complicity in a plot to destabilize a key strategic ally in the Middle East. Evidence you are about to provide for me. Your government will not risk a major diplomatic crisis for one reckless billionaire who got caught funding a rebellion. They will cut you loose. You will be a cautionary tale on the evening news." The finality in her voice was absolute. He was utterly, completely alone, trapped in a gilded room, his life's work dissolving around him, with a sniper's laser sight a constant companion on his chest. He broke. The dam of his pride, his arrogance, his entire identity shattered into a million pieces. He slumped forward, his head in his hands. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with defeat. "I want the dagger my uncle aims at my father's back," she said simply. "I want the names, the accounts, the plans. You will give me everything you know. You will make a recorded statement. You will sign a full confession. You will contact Tariq al-Jamil and proceed with the deal, but you will do so under our direction. You will become our instrument, our listening post, within their camp." Thorne looked up, a spark of hope in his eyes. "And if I do all this, you'll let me go? You'll give me my assets back?" Ilara stared at him, her expression unreadable. "If you do all this, and you do it perfectly, and my family remains safe, then I will consider allowing you to keep your life. Your assets, your reputation. Mr. Thorne, that is the price you have already paid for your education tonight. Consider it the most expensive lesson you will ever learn, that some things in this world are not for sale, and some people are not to be touched." The choice was simple, a life of quiet ruin or no life at all. "I'll do it," he said, the words tumbling out of him. "I'll do anything you want." Ilara nodded slowly. She reached down and discreetly pressed a small hidden button on the underside of the table. The heavy doors opened and Captain Kalen entered, holding a secure tablet device. "Record everything," she commanded. For the next 2 hours, Marcus Thorne, the man who had brought corporations to their knees, recounted his own fall from grace. He detailed the meetings in Geneva, the encrypted emails, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He named names: a disgruntled army colonel, a cousin in the oil ministry, a European arms dealer. With every word, he was dismantling his own life and handing Ilara the weapons she needed to save hers. He was no longer a kingmaker. He was a key witness, his voice a monotone of pure, abject fear. While Thorne confessed, the world outside the private dining room was being carefully managed. Sheikh Al-Fahim and his advisor were escorted to a separate room. The sheikh, a man of honor, was deeply apologetic and offered his complete cooperation. He had been approached about the Oasis project as a potential regional partner, and he was horrified to learn of its true purpose. His information corroborated Thorne's, adding another layer to the evidence. The advisor, however, was a different story. Ilara, remembering the flicker of calculation in his eyes, had instructed Kalen to watch him closely. Under questioning, separated from his employer, the advisor's composure cracked. He was a distant relative of the Al-Haddad clan, placed in the Sheikh's employ years ago. He was Saif's man. His role was to lend the project an air of legitimacy by associating it with the Sheikh's sterling reputation. He was another piece of the puzzle, another traitor brought into the light by the evening's chaos. Downstairs, the other patrons of Ethelgard's were being debriefed and released one by one. Kaelin's men were not brutes, they were intelligence officers. They moved with quiet professionalism, taking names, explaining that a serious diplomatic incident had occurred, and having each guest sign a non-disclosure agreement backed by the full weight of the British government, which was now scrambling to contain the situation. Their phones were wiped of any photos or videos. The story would be contained. The official narrative would be a gas leak, a security scare. No one would believe the truth anyway. A princess, a billionaire, snipers, it was the stuff of fantasy. By the time Thorne's confession was complete, a new plan was in motion. He was not a prisoner to be locked away. He was an asset to be deployed. "You will return to your hotel," Elara instructed him as Kaelin stood by with the tablet containing his signed recorded confession. "You will be escorted by 2 of my men who will now serve as your new security detail. They will not leave your side. You will call Tariq. You will tell him the deal is done. You will arrange the first wire transfer to an account we will provide, an account we control." "They'll be watching me," Thorne said, his voice trembling. "They'll know something is wrong." "Of course they will," Kaelin interjected smoothly. "Which is why Her Highness has arranged a plausible narrative for you. You were at dinner. There was a security incident. A rival corporation, perhaps. You felt threatened, so you hired a new, highly professional security team. The Al-Zahran Royal Guard is the best private security money can buy. It will look like you are flashing your wealth and paranoia. It is perfectly in character." Thorne could only nod. They had thought of everything. He was trapped in a perfectly constructed prison of his own making. Elara stood to leave. She paused at the door and looked back at the broken man at the table. For a fleeting moment, she saw not the arrogant tycoon who had struck her, but a pathetic, frightened figure, stripped of everything that had defined him. There was no triumph in his destruction, only a grim, necessary finality. "One more thing, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet. "When you speak to Tariq, he will likely have heard rumors about tonight. He will ask what happened." She walked back to the table and leaned in close, her voice a whisper. "You will tell him you had dinner at Ethelgard's. You will tell him the service was terrible. And you will tell him you had to put a clumsy waitress in her place. And you will enjoy telling him. Because if he detects one hint of fear, one note of doubt in your voice, the last thing you will ever see is a little red dot. Do you understand?" He nodded, a tear finally tracing a path down his pale cheek. "I understand." "Good," she said, straightening up. The waitress was gone. The frightened girl in hiding was gone. In their place stood a commander, a strategist, a future queen. She walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving Marcus Thorne to contemplate the ruins of his life. Her own life had been irrevocably altered. She could never go back to being Lena. The sanctuary of anonymity was gone. But as she descended the stairs, ready to step back into the world of shadows and thrones, she felt not loss, but a strange sense of empowerment. Her uncle had meant to use a fool to fund a war. Instead, he had handed his niece the very weapon she needed to win it. The game was afoot. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception and control. Marcus Thorne, a ghost haunting his own penthouse suite at the Savoy, became a puppet, his strings pulled by an invisible princess and her ever-present guards. He made the calls, sent the emails, and played the part of the arrogant billionaire sealing the deal of a lifetime. His new security, 2 of Kaelin's most imposing men, were a constant presence, their silent vigilance a far more effective prison than any iron bars. They were his shadows, his minders, and his potential executioners. Elara, meanwhile, had moved from her small, anonymous flat into a secure suite at the Al-Zahran embassy. The transition was jarring. She traded her simple waitress uniform for silk blouses and tailored slacks, her quiet solitude for a constant stream of briefings and encrypted communications with her father's palace in Al-Zahra. The information gleaned from Thorne and the traitorous advisor was a bombshell, revealing the depth and breadth of her uncle's conspiracy. It was worse than they had feared. General Saif had allies in the military, the government, and even within the extended royal family. Her father, King Khalid, was a man of peace and wisdom, but he was not naive. On a secure video call, his face etched with worry but also with pride, he listened as Ilara laid out her plan. Saif believes he is in control, she explained, pointing to a diagram on a digital map. He is using Thorn to funnel money through a series of shell companies, ending in a bank in Cyprus. From there, it is to be used to pay a Serbian arms dealer for a shipment of anti-aircraft missiles and small arms. We could stop the transfer, seize the money now, her father suggested, his voice weary. No, father, Ilara countered firmly. If we do that, we only cut off one stream. Saif will find another. We have Thorn, but we don't have the entire network. We must let the transfer proceed. There was a stunned silence from the advisors in the king's study. Captain Kalen, standing behind Ilara, gave a subtle, approving nod. Amira, that is madness, one of the king's ministers protested. You want to allow our enemies to be armed. I want our enemies to reveal themselves, she corrected him. We will let the first transfer go through, but we will control the destination. Kalen's contacts in European intelligence have already flagged the Cyprus account. When Saif's people try to move the money to the arms dealer, the account will be frozen under international anti-terrorism protocols. But before that happens, we will have a complete list of everyone who accesses that account. We will have every traitor who dips his hand into Thorn's pot of gold. It was a dangerous gambit, a high-stakes poker game played with millions of dollars and the fate of a nation. They were not just trying to stop a coup, they were setting a trap to eradicate the conspiracy root and stem. Thorn, under immense pressure, performed his role flawlessly. He was a natural actor, his arrogance a perfect mask for his terror. On a conference call with Tariq al-Jamil, he boasted about the ease of the transfer, his voice full of the swagger that had once been genuine. The first 10 million is on its way, he crowed, while one of Kalen's men stood just out of the webcam's view, a hand resting lightly on a holstered weapon. A sign of my commitment. The rest will follow once the final papers are signed. Tariq, on the other end of the line, was ecstatic. His voice was smooth, full of false praise. Excellent, Mr. Thorn. Your vision is unparalleled. General Saif is most pleased. He sees you as a true partner in the future of our nation. The future you plan to build on my father's grave, Ilara thought, listening in from another room. The most delicate part of the plan involved Sheikh Al-Fahim. He was a man of honor, and once he understood the stakes, he agreed to play his part. He contacted General Saif directly, feigning ignorance of the plot. He expressed his enthusiasm for the Oasis project, but insisted on a face-to-face meeting with all key stakeholders to finalize the regional partnership agreements. I am an old man, General, the Sheikh said, his voice a perfect blend of warmth and traditional business sense. I do not build futures through screens and telephones. I must look a man in the eye, shake his hand, and share bread with him. Let us meet in a neutral place, Geneva. Saif, eager to secure the Sheikh's legitimate backing and vast wealth, couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. He was walking into the trap. The stage was set for the final act. Geneva, the city of spies and secrets, would be the backdrop. A suite at the Beau Rivage Hotel was booked. Ilara, no longer in hiding, would be there. This was no longer just about stopping her uncle. It was about confronting him. It was about showing him, and the world, who the true power in Al-Zahra was. As she prepared to leave London, Ilara stood before a mirror in her embassy suite. She was dressed not as a princess in flowing robes, but as a modern stateswoman in a sharp, dark pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back, her expression resolute. The faint mark on her cheek had faded, but she would never forget it. It was a reminder of her vulnerability, but also of the strength she had discovered within herself. She had been tested by fire, and she had not burned. Captain Kalen entered the room. The jet is ready, Your Highness. Mr. Thorn is on his way to the airfield. And the package? She asked. Kalen held up a slim, elegant briefcase. Delivered this morning, as you requested. She nodded. Good. My uncle values grand gestures. We shall not disappoint him. The flight to Geneva was tense. Thorn sat at the front of the private jet, a pale, silent figure staring out at the clouds. He was a man hollowed out, his fortune and his future held hostage. Ilara sat at the back, reviewing the final details of the operation with Kaelin. Dozens of her royal guards were already on the ground in Geneva, working in concert with Swiss authorities and allied intelligence agencies. The hotel was secured, every angle was covered. When they landed, a convoy of black sedans whisked them away to the hotel. Thorne was taken to a separate suite, his role for the moment complete. Ilara was escorted to the presidential suite, where the meeting would take place. It was a vast, opulent space with panoramic views of Lake Geneva and the Jet d'Eau. It felt a world away from the cramped staff break room at Ethelgard's. She stood by the window, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She was calm. The fear and anger had been honed into a sharp, focused purpose. She was not just her father's daughter anymore, she was her people's protector. An hour later, Kaelin entered. "He is here, Your Highness. General Saif and Tariq al-Jamil have just entered the hotel." Ilara took a deep breath. "Let them come." She moved to the head of the long boardroom table in the center of the suite. She remained standing as the doors opened. General Saif strode in, a bear of a man in a crisp military uniform, his chest adorned with medals he had largely awarded to himself. He was the personification of brute force and ambition. Behind him slithered Tariq al-Jamil, his chief strategist, a man with a serpent's smile and intelligent, cunning eyes. They stopped dead when they saw her. Saif's face, a mask of jovial confidence, crumbled into disbelief and then darkened into thunderous rage. Tariq's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. "Amira," Saif boomed, his voice a mixture of shock and fury. "What is the meaning of this? You should be in London, playing servant. Where is the Sheikh? Where is Thorne?" Ilara smiled, a cool, dangerous smile that did not reach her eyes. "Uncle, so good to see you. You're looking well. Treason seems to agree with you." She gestured to the chairs. "Please sit. Sheikh Al-Fahim sends his regrets. He has a sudden aversion to dining with traitors. And Mr. Thorne is indisposed, but he asked me to give you this." She slid the elegant briefcase Kaelin had brought onto the table. It glided across the polished surface, stopping directly in front of General Saif. "A gift," she said, "a token of his esteem." Suspicious but intrigued, Saif flicked the latches and opened the case. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not money or documents. It was a single, pristine white linen napkin from Ethelgard's restaurant. And folded neatly on top of it was a simple waitress's apron. Stitched onto the apron in neat crimson thread were the words, "Anti min nasl al-Khadimin." "You are from the bloodline of servants." Saif stared at it, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He finally understood. He had been played. The insult he had armed Thorne with had been turned back on him like a sharpened blade. "You," he began, his voice a low growl, his hand instinctively moving towards the sidearm at his hip. Before his fingers could touch the butt of the pistol, every door to the suite burst open. A dozen of Ilara's royal guards, clad in black tactical gear and armed with assault rifles, flooded the room, their movements swift and silent. Simultaneously, red dots, just like the ones that had terrified Thorne, appeared on the chests and foreheads of Saif and Tariq. Saif froze, his hand hovering over his weapon. He looked from the guards to the unwavering red dots, and then to the calm, implacable face of his niece. "It's over, Uncle," Ilara said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute victory. "Your accounts are frozen. Your co-conspirators in the army have been arrested in a coordinated operation that began an hour ago. Your arms dealer is in the custody of Interpol. And your American financier has sung a song of your treason that will be played in every intelligence agency from Washington to Moscow." She picked up a tablet from the table and turned it to face him. On the screen was Marcus Thorne, his face pale, his voice steady, confessing every detail of the plot. Tariq al-Jamil, the strategist, the snake, slumped into a chair, his face ashen. He knew the game was lost. Saif, however, was a creature of pure rage. "You think this stops me?" he roared, his eyes wild. "I have loyal men. I am a general of the royal army." "You were a general," Ilara corrected him softly. By order of the king, your commission was revoked this morning. You are now Saif al-Haddad, a private citizen charged with high treason against the crown. She nodded to Kalen. Seize him. As the guards moved in, Saif finally snapped. With a roar of fury, he drew his pistol. He never had a chance to aim it. Kalen moved with blinding speed, not with a weapon, but with his hands. A sharp, precise strike disarmed Saif, sending the pistol clattering across the floor. 2 more guards subdued him, forcing him to his knees. He fought like a cornered animal, but the guards were disciplined, efficient, and strong. Tariq wisely put his hands up in the air, a look of utter defeat on his face. The great General Saif, the man who would be king, was kneeling on the floor of a hotel suite in Geneva, disarmed and defeated by the niece he had so fatally underestimated. Ilara walked around the table until she stood directly in front of him. She looked down at her uncle, not with hatred, but with a kind of weary pity. You sought a crown, uncle, she said. But you never understood what it means to wear one. It is not a prize to be won. It is a burden to be carried, a duty, a sacrifice. She knelt down so they were at eye level. You wanted to start a war. You would have torn our country apart, spilled the blood of our people, all for this. She gestured around the opulent room. For power, for pride. She stood up, her duty done. Take them away, she said to Kalen. They will be flown back to Al-Zahra to face my father's justice. As the guards hauled the disgraced general and his strategist to their feet and dragged them from the room, Ilara walked back to the window. The lights of Geneva glittered below, a peaceful, indifferent audience to the drama that had just unfolded. The coup was over before it had even begun. A kingdom had been saved, not by armies clashing in the desert, but here, in a quiet room, with information, strategy, and the unyielding will of a princess who had refused to be broken. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her father. It contained no words, only a single image, a photograph of the sun rising over the palace in Al-Zahra, the golden light touching the highest spires. A new day was dawning, secure and safe. The journey back to London was quiet, contemplative. Marcus Thorne, now irrelevant to the larger plot, was a loose end to be tied. He was a broken man, his swagger and arrogance replaced by a hollow-eyed acceptance of his fate. He had cooperated, and Ilara was a woman of her word. Your life is your own, Mr. Thorne, she said to him as they prepared to land. Most of your assets have been seized by various international bodies as proceeds of crime and funding for terrorism. What little you have left, you may keep. You will never set foot in my country or do business with any of our allies again. You are, for all intents and purposes, erased from the world you once dominated. Thorne nodded, not even bothering to argue. What will you do now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ilara looked out the window at the sprawling lights of the city where she had been a simple waitress just days before. I am going home, she said, but I am not going back to the life I left. Things have changed. I have changed. Upon their return, Thorne was released. He vanished into obscurity, a ghost of his former self, his name becoming a footnote in financial history. A cautionary tale of a titan who flew too close to a desert sun. His last public sighting was of him getting into a simple taxi, his billion-dollar suits replaced by an off-the-rack coat, his face aged by a decade in a single week. For Ilara, the final piece of business was at Ethelgard's. She did not arrive as a princess in a motorcade, but as a woman paying a debt. She entered through the staff entrance, dressed in simple, elegant clothes. The kitchen staff and waiters stopped what they were doing, staring in stunned silence. They had all heard the official story of the gas leak, but the rumors of what truly happened were far more fantastic. She found the manager, Julian, in his office. He shot to his feet, his face pale. Your Highness, he stammered. Please, Julian, she said, her smile warm and genuine. I came to apologize for the disruption my family affairs caused your establishment. She handed him a check. It was drawn from a private royal account. The amount on it was enough to cover the damages, the lost revenue, and to give every single member of his staff a bonus equivalent to a year's salary. Julian stared at the number, his eyes wide. This is too much. It is a token of my gratitude, Ilara said. For 6 months, You and your staff gave me a gift I can never repay. You gave me a place to be normal. You treated me with professionalism and kindness. I will not forget it." She left as quietly as she had arrived, a few of the younger waiters she had befriended waving a shy goodbye. She was leaving Lena behind, but she would carry the lessons Lena had learned with her forever. A week later, Princess Amira Elara bint Khalid al-Zahra landed at the royal airfield in her home country. The sun was hot, the air filled with the scent of desert sand and jasmine. Her father, the king, was there to greet her. He did not bow or offer a formal welcome. He simply opened his arms, and she ran into them, a daughter returning to her father. "You have your mother's strength," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "and your own wisdom." In the months that followed, Elara did not retreat behind palace walls. She became an active, vital force in the kingdom's governance. Armed with the knowledge she had gained from her time as Lena, she spearheaded reforms for workers' rights, for education, and for modernizing the economy without losing its soul. She had seen the world from the bottom up, and it had given her a perspective no royal tutor ever could. She was beloved by her people, not just for her title, but for her actions. She was their princess, forged in the heart of London, tested by a billionaire's fury, and returned as a true queen in waiting. And as she stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out at the vibrant city she had saved, she knew her journey was only just beginning.